How do you actually understand George Bridgman? George Bridgman is one of those artists that you'd recommend among artists like Andrew Loomis or Bert Hogarth. People that have really strong academic books are sort of like instrumental to a lot of people's careers for helping them learn how to draw. The frustrating part about it is his drawings are really hard to decipher. I think if you look at them for more than a few seconds, you will be confused by like what's going on with this arm or this leg. It's like it doesn't, like the lessons that he's trying to talk about aren't necessarily obvious when you first immediately look at them. When looking at these shapes, again, it's really hard to decipher exactly what's going on. What is like happening here technically to make it seem like this arm is popping in front of this arm? Why is he over exaggerating all these different grooves and bumps and making the wrist straighter here? All this kind of stuff. Big portion of everything that he's doing is sort of like operating off just like a few key concepts that he carries throughout all of his books. I think a lot of George Bridgman's books are almost like he explains his concepts within the first 20 pages, and the rest of his books are just kind of applying those concepts to more and more complicated subjects. So, for example, like if we look at this arm, you see this really complicated shape right here, full of a whole bunch of different lines and complex shapes, anatomy, all that kind of stuff. The important thing that he's trying to communicate here is more so this idea of just this like chicken leg shape being wedged into a cylinder or a circle. That is like way more the lesson here rather than anything else. It's just a series of really creative ways of wedging and combining shapes in a way that is interesting and compelling to the viewer. So here he's taking the shoulder and wedging it into the bicep, into the brachialis and the tricep and all that kind of stuff. And he's just trying to do it in a way to where it's super obvious. The reason he draws the way he draws, where it's like robotic or it's machine-like or something, it's sort of like he's playing with like clay or wedging together pieces of wood. The reason it is that way is because he's trying to like over-exaggerate these concepts. He's trying to put them in a way to where it's like almost hard for you not to understand it. It's not like he's suggesting that you draw that way. In some of these drawings over here, this is like more akin to what an academic drawing might look like from him, where it's like it's a little bit more subtle. It's a little bit more like he's thinking of creative or smooth ways of transitioning between these like wedge shapes versus it being just about, just trying to hit you over the head with these concepts. It's going through and thinking about how all these muscles are connecting together and wedging into the knee, but it's all within the... And when it comes to practical usage of this stuff, the way that I think of it, or the way that I draw personally when I'm just kind of drawing for fun, is more something like this, to where I'm like thinking of a shape, trying to both think of like that sort of Bridgman-y lesson of trying to learn how to wedge things together, while also thinking of maybe like a little bit more of a less crude or less like literal way of combining those two things together. Again, I think when looking at artists like George Bridgman, it's easy to get caught up in like the theory or the like, the things he's doing is purely just like, oh, that's the way that you draw a leg for sure 100% of the time. That's not the case. It's like you take it and you're like, oh, he's just trying to emphasize you wedge shapes together. You think of things as three-dimensional ideas versus it being like only the 2D stuff. Like if you look at a bunch of comic artists, like I know Jim Lee has been pretty influenced by George Bridgman. A bunch of his artwork is just applied Bridgman. Some stuff on Batman Hush, where you compare like a George Bridgman knee back to back to one of his Batman drawings. It's almost like one-to-one. Same thing with like his torsos or his arms. And at a certain point, like you're able to get so strong at just combining and wedging shapes that you're able to successfully like tell a story without even really thinking of the anatomy or just thinking of the general ideas and the general shapes above everything else. When it comes to like drawing a torso, I'm thinking of the 2D gestural shapes underneath, but I'm trying to keep Bridgman in mind to where it's like, you know, if this is actually a torso right here, at some point you're going to have the pecs in here, and they're going to have to be sitting on top of the barrel of the chest. And then the lats are going to be sitting behind that. And the rib cage is going to, at some point, have to be established along with the obliques and the abs and everything that comes together to draw a successful person. And if you're able to understand like little concepts like the wedging stuff, it like whenever you find yourself in a little trap or predicament where you don't really know where to go next with drawing something more effectively, falling back on Bridgman for me has always been a useful little strategy or trick. Going through and drawing something like an arm, I can go through and think of how all of the shapes are kind of wedging together and operating on top of something that's a very simplified cylinder, essentially this. But the Bridgman sort of thinking allows me to add all these like little tertiary anatomical shapes on top of that. And at a certain point, I think that Bridgman's way of drawing is more like creative and illustrative than it is of just about correct anatomy and correct proportion. When you look at all of his drawings, so much of it is just like, how do you have something that's extremely gestural and flowy while also having it have structure where it feels like it's locking down in between each part and sitting flat on a floor. Again, something that Bridgman could explain very quickly in the very beginning of his books, but it takes that studying of his drawings and studying how each different problem can be solved within the human body using this way of thinking to think of things more in like the George Bridgman structural sort of way. And I guess doing one more drawing, like doing something like just when I'm drawing, again, I'm thinking of how something like this is a cylinder, but then thinking of how the like extensor flexor group is also being thrown up on top of that, and how the triceps are fitting here, and how the bicep is here. I talk more about this within a gesture course I have on my Gumroad. I'm going through ideas like gesture and structure and how they relate to each other, anatomy and how it relates to still maintaining energy within your drawings. All of that stuff is on Gumroad right now if you want to go check it out. I'm editing this in post, and I thought I would add that if you'd like to learn from me one-on-one, I have a mentorship on my Patreon where I will sit down with you and talk with you to help you figure out whatever your artistic goals are. Thank you so much for getting this far. I really appreciate it. If you'd like to support me, please consider liking and subscribing and sharing around with your friends. That stuff really does help me out. Thank you, and I hope you have a good day.